talks to you. We don't get to know you. We don't share burdens and struggles together. This is not your church. If you want to journey with people and through the ups and downs, the bumps and bruises, the pains and sorrows, the laughter and the tears, that is what New Life is about. There's just, we are not into playing Christianity. We're not into just following rules and religion. We are into Jesus Christ. And that's what the season of Easter is about. Who is Jesus? And of course, if you were here last week, maybe you weren't, but let me just give you a little rundown. You have an idea about Jesus in your head and in your mind. And that idea was formed through whatever formative experiences you went through as a child. Maybe it was Christian school. Maybe it was Catholic school. Maybe it was some type of catechism you went through. Maybe it was A&E or biography channel that you watched, documentaries about Jesus. Maybe someone's giving you some book that describes Jesus and, different things they found about Jesus and, new things about Jesus that no one knew before. And, and so you've got these ideas. Maybe you've watched several movies about Jesus, and so you have clear images about Jesus that maybe aren't formed from the Bible, but yet, you're sure you know who Jesus is. Maybe you had pictures in your Bible like I did as a kid that were like, okay, that's what Jesus looks like. He's got long hair, blue eyes, fair skin, always genteel looking, and I'm like, couldn't Jesus be a little tougher looking, but no, he's not, he's and so we have to kind of sometimes wade through that and discover who Jesus really is. So we come to the Gospel of John. John is writing in the 1st century. He was one of the 12 disciples, and not only that, he was part of the executive team, the inner three. He got to know Jesus as close as anyone probably on the earth at the time did. And so he records his own account of Jesus Christ in his life called the Gospel of John. He doesn't write everything about Jesus because he's like, there's no way I could even begin to tell you everything that we saw, but I'm going to give you a comparative sampling with the expressed purpose that you would believe in Jesus. That's the whole reason I'm writing this gospel. Not just to tell you, here's historical facts about Jesus. There's a reason I'm writing this stuff. So you would know that Jesus is the Christ and that by believing in him, you would have life in his name. And so throughout the Gospel of John, 7 times, he makes these I am statements. Last week we looked at Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And of course it was in the context of him feeding the 5,000 on the hillsides and the people confused about what that miracle meant. And Jesus is like, look, I'm here to meet your deepest spiritual needs. I'm not here to become the ATM Jesus. I'm not the welfare Jesus. I'm here looking for your eternal spiritual soul satisfaction, and I'm ready to provide that for you. And he says, whoever eats of me will never be hungry. Whoever, who believes in me will never be thirsty. And that word never is the strongest negation in the Greek language possible. No, never, absolutely not, ever, never, nothing ever happening like that, ever, never. The problem is when you try to satisfy your soul with other things, you're always hungry, It's like eating those cheap fast food meals. Yeah, they're cheap. But an hour and a half later, you're hungry again, right? But Jesus satisfies you once and for all. Never be hungry, John 6:35 says. But in John 8:12, where we are today, we bump ahead in the gospel. We find Jesus saying this statement about himself. John chapter 8, verse 12. It's on the screen as well. Jesus spoke out again. I am the light of the world. The one who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I am the light of the world. Now, last 2 weekends, prairie dwellers, we experienced this phenomenon, which we call whiteout driving. When the snow is just swirling and you just kind of find some lights, hopefully big semi-lights that you can follow and kind of get to your destination. I'm sure you've all had that experience where you're like, I can't see a thing, and there's some lights, great, I'm just going to follow those lights. And it happened to me just when I was going to pick up Elisa from the airport after she was coming back, and Zoe from Africa, and then I was driving between here and Edmonton, blowing snow, swirling around, and so I kind of would get behind lights, but then these guys are going too slow, so I'd pass them, and I saw some lights up in the distance. I'm like, I'm going to catch up to that guy, then I'll pass him too, and I'm getting close. It's some tail lights, and there they are, way up there in the distance, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get in. Now, understand, it's 5:30 in the morning. my coffee is sitting here. I've just begun it. So nothing is quite flowing yet, right? I'm kind of driving in that sort of semi-comatose space. I'm not waking up yet, but there's the lights. I'm going to catch up to that semi, and I'm moving. And all of a sudden, the snow sometimes stops swirling. And then I noticed, there's the back of a semi, right in front of me. I was looking at those little lights on the very top, and these lights down here were covered, and so I couldn't see these lights. I was looking at those lights. I thought those lights were these lights, and there it was, and I was like, oh, I got to slow down. I got to pass this guy, and it was a very frightening experience. The other thing that would happen is, if that guy in the front of the line goes into the ditch, everyone who's following him just goes, you all end up in the same place. So what light are you following? If you follow the wrong light, you will end up in the wrong place. And John makes it very clear, and he draws a line in the sand, basically, and it's like, look, you're either here, following the light, or you're here in the darkness. The world would like to say that there's many lights and they all end up at the same big light. So just get on your light and go with your light and you're going to be fine. But the Gospel of John, the first century eyewitness of Jesus Christ, the one who saw him die on the cross, who saw the empty tomb, who verified that Jesus Christ, who saw the risen Christ, tells us today in 2020 that Jesus Christ is the light of the world. And to be careful about who you're following. What light are you following? Now, just to give some context, the verses aren't on the screen if you have your Bible, or you could just listen along, but John begins his gospel, and it kind of goes back to the very beginning. I said this last week too. The other gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're called the synoptic gospels. Those guys, they go back to the genealogy of Jesus. They show his Jewish lineage, even back to Adam, and they show how, his birth happened and all this stuff. John goes back even further than that. He says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. The person I'm talking about here, Jesus Christ, the incarnate Word, existed before time. And in verse 4 of chapter 1, he says this thing. He says, in him was life. And the life was the light of mankind or humanity. And the light shines on in the darkness, but the darkness has not mastered it. So he introduces these great themes. There's this theme of life, and life is light, and there's also darkness. And he introduces this theme at the very beginning of the gospel. Understand, he's like, Jesus comes into a context. This is the context. He existed before time, but the light enters this dark world. Why? To show us the way out of this storm that we all live in. He is the light. And that light is life. In the Greek language, there's several words for life. One of those is bios. It's just kind of physical life, blood pumping, nerves shocking, it's just the stuff that kind of is life, physical life. Every animal has bios, physical life. But then he talks about this other aspect of life. My daughter's named after this word, Zoe. It's spiritual, qualitative life. It's relational life. It's life at its fullest capacity. And while we love our dog and our cat and our little pets, they don't experience Zoe. They experience bios. But as creatures created in the image of God, we have the capacity to experience real, lasting, abundant life. And the word that was before the beginning that entered this world was life. And that life is the light of humanity. It says in verse 9 of chapter 1 that the true light who gives light to everyone was coming into the world. So here it is. The eternal God sends his Son, the incarnate Word. The Word became flesh, dwelt among us, into this dark world to show us the light, to reveal God to us, so that we can follow the right light and not follow lights that lead us to the wrong places. What light are you following? The people of Jesus' days had lights that were not even bad lights, but they just weren't the true light. The light of tradition. Some of you maybe have followed that light in your past. Where, there's And Jesus might even be part of that tradition, but you're following the tradition, not Jesus, right? You're doing certain things, you're following certain rules, you're dressed in certain ways, whatever it is. I mean, every religion has their own kind of nuances of this, but it's not the true light, but it's a light. You could be following the light of education. Well, if I just learn more, that's going to lead me to understand my world and to experience life at its fullest capacity. You could be, and most of us follow the light of self. I'm my own light. I don't need any other lights. But it doesn't take you very long when you discover that light actually doesn't lead you anywhere. And God sends Jesus Christ into this world to be the light of the world. And so contextually, what we find ourselves in John chapter 8 is at the end of this Feast of Tabernacles. Jesus is in Jerusalem. The Feast of Tabernacles was a celebration of the time when the Israelites were led through the wilderness. Before they entered the promised land, they would build these little booths and sit in these booths. If you go to Israel today, and even some of the Jewish communities around in North America, they'll build like little shelters in their backyard or on their decks of their apartment buildings and kind of simulate this experience of living in the wilderness and God's provision, God's leading through the wilderness. And so the Feast of Tabernacles was a celebration. And in John chapter 7, verse 37, as we just build the context for John 8, on the last day of the feast, it says, the greatest day, Jesus stood up and shouted out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. Just as the scripture says, from within him will flow rivers of living water." Every day, the Feast of Tabernacles, the priests would go down to the pool of Siloam. It's a huge staircase, down to this pool, and they would take this gold receptacle, this pot, and they would fill it with water, and then they would march up those stairs, back up to the Temple Mount, and then they would pour out that water as a libation, and they would kind of celebrate the fact that God took care of their needs in the wilderness. Not only that, it was also a recognition that the rain that they required for the agricultural lives that they lived was dependent on God's good, gracious hand providing it for them. And so that's what it was. It was pouring out. I mean, they remembered how God poured water out of the rock, in the wilderness as they were, dying of thirst. And boom. So every day that this would happen, it was kind of a significant part of the worship. And then Jesus gets up and says, guess what? I am the living water. And it produces this controversial response. I'm not here to preach on that passage, but just so you understand the context. This is the feast going on. These are some of the actions. But there was another action that occurred. In the evening, as the feast they would have this evening celebration, the Feast of Tabernacles. They had these big, and different commentators describe it, as a candelabra. One commentator describes it as a kind of a cauldron with 65 liters of oil. So imagine 16 milk jugs poured into this thing. So I imagine it kind of like the Olympic cauldron, right? When they take the Olympic torch and they light the cauldron and boom, So imagine there's multiple of these cauldrons sitting in the court of the Jewish women in the temple in Jerusalem. The temple, again, is on the high plateau. So every part of the city and the surrounding area kind of looks up to this area. So there it is. And as the evening approached, this was a significant part of the celebration as they would come and these priests would crawl up the ladder and they would light that cauldron. And then these big, now understand, no electricity. This is candle era. This is lantern era. This is torch era. And so suddenly you have this massive cauldron burning up to the sky, and there's several of them. And so everyone in Jerusalem would look and see the light just kind of coming off the Temple Mount. It was remarkable and I think awe-inspiring, and people would worship and dance around and celebrating the fact that in the wilderness, God had led them as a pillar of fire. At day, a pillar of cloud. At night, a pillar of fire. He would move before them, lead them through the wilderness. God led us. And so as the Feast of Tabernacles went on there, they would light these cauldrons, boom, boom, boom. And they're like, yes, God led us. He is our light. The Lord is our light. Yes, the Lord is our light. And then Jesus, the guy from Galilee, carpenter's son, commoner, gets up and says, I am the light of the world. So understand, this is blasphemous. He is claiming to be God. At the end of chapter 8, he's debating with these guys, and he basically says, before Abraham was, I am. I mean, he's saying, I'm God. So John 8, chapter 8, verse 12, you got to understand this context that's going on here. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. These cauldrons are glowing in the distance, and Jesus is like, yeah, that points to me. And they have to decide, what light are they following? I brought some lights with me. I found this really cool light. It was in the bargain bin at Princess Auto. 37 cents. And I got what it's paid for, Anyway, it's an LED light, battery powered, right? And so, you can just pull it on, I mean, you can hardly, count your fingers under this light. It kind of casts a sort of a kind of a nauseous shadow. It hangs in my chicken coop usually. I wiped it off, so no avian flu here or coronavirus. So there it is. It's safe, But it's like, this is the kind of light that we often choose to follow.
It's dark. That's not a light.
Exactly. I mean, well, if we really put it in the dark, you might kind of see there's a slight glow to it, but it's really not doing a whole lot. But then you go and you get the illuminator. And it's, we got some light here. I'm not going to shine it in your face, but I mean, this one I can shine across the field and I can see, if there's any coyotes or deer in my, quarter mile away. I mean, it's, Jesus is like, I'm here to bring you some significant light. The Jews want to hold on to the little LED, which was just a bare little tiny light to point towards the true light, which is Jesus Christ, but they're just missing it. I mean, you'll encounter people that grew up in religious cultures that just can't let go of the light of tradition in life. And even when they're encountered with the truth about Jesus, they just, no, I've got my thing, I've got my light, I'm good. And it's like, well, where's that leading you? In circles. And Jesus comes to lead us out of that circular darkness, feeble attempts to discover pathway for our life, into the true and living light, which is himself, which is Jesus Christ. So I am the light of the world. But there's something we have to do with this light. I mean, who is Jesus? He's the light of the world. But what do we do with that truth? Jesus never presents the truth and just kind of hangs it out there. There's some response, right? I mean, in John 6, he says, I'm the bread of life. He says, the one who comes to me will never go hungry. The one who believes in me will never be thirsty. So there's an action on our part. And so here it says, I am the light of the world. The one who follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Follows me. Throughout John's gospel, he'll talk about these verbs, right? Whoever receives Jesus, whoever comes to Jesus. And of course, the word believe occurs again and again and again. And that's kind of his whole word. It goes, you can't just look at Jesus and not do anything with that truth. You have to respond to it, John says. You want to move into the light, you have to leave the darkness and approach the light. You need to follow Jesus. It's a present tense verb. It's a continual action. It's not I follow Jesus, good, I'm done, No. It's you're now following Jesus. You see the light and you follow the light. It leads you where to go. Follows Jesus. But you're following some light. There's some light in your life that dictates the actions and the steps and the decisions that you make. It may be your own ambition. It may be your own education. It may be your own wisdom, whatever it is. But as John presents Jesus Christ, he says, here's the superlative light. Here's the perfect light. Here is the light which is life. You want to experience life at the greatest possible level, you need the light who is Jesus Christ. And if whoever follows him will never walk in darkness. Again, the same word, never. Absolutely not. By no means, ever, absolutely no possible way will they ever walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. If your life seems to not have the quality that you wish it would, perhaps you're not following the true light. What happens in John's gospel and in the gospels in total is people can see Jesus but not do anything about it. You can know about Jesus but not know Jesus. Muslims, they like Jesus. He's a great prophet to them. Gandhi, a Hindu master, teacher, loved the person and the teachings of Jesus Christ. The Buddhists love the peace-loving Jesus. Even secular leadership authors will quote Jesus as a great model of servant leadership, but they don't move to follow him or to believe in him or to come to him. He's just a person that they fit into their own light schema. And John says that doesn't work. Either he's all or nothing. You need to follow him. If you don't follow him, you are in darkness. It's a hard truth. It's hard to tell someone who's incredibly religious, who's done all the right things, that if they don't follow Jesus and believe in him, they're still in darkness. They don't like to hear that because I did all the right things. I clicked off the boxes, and they're like, that's not what it's about. It's about following, believing, and coming to receiving Jesus. It's making him your life. To follow Jesus means you have to cease to follow whatever light is going on in your life. Those little tiny lights like I did that almost caused an accident, those lights that lead you into the ditch, you need to find the true light, Jesus. It doesn't mean you need to be rude about those that may be in your life that have other lights. I mean, you want to point them to Jesus, but ultimately it requires a step for you to say, I'm not going to follow any other lights except the light that is Jesus Christ. Just as the Israelites followed that pillar of fire, wherever it went. When it stopped, they stopped. When it moved, they moved. When it stopped, they stopped, and they just waited. They were on God's timetable. And this is the problem with following Jesus is whatever plan you had, you kind of have to scrap it and let Jesus write the plan for you. That's hard, right? Oh, I got my plan. I got my life figured out. And Jesus is like, I've got a better plan. You can stick to your half-watt LED 3 AAA batteries if you want. Is that the life you want, really? Or you can have my light. Lisa and I were walking this last summer. There's some lease roads around our property, and we often walk. But this particular day, we were late. It had gotten dark, but we're like, well, let's go for a walk. It's nice weather, and so we walked down the road, and there's a junction on the road there. And I had the illuminator with me. It was leading us. And I shined the illuminator down this road, to the north. And in the distance, I see some lights. Not real lights, actually. The light was reflecting off something that made that look like a light. There were 4 of them, and they were kind of bouncing. Ding, 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 ding. And I kind of I actually went, whoop, I let out a little bit of a whoop, and the lights kept bouncing and getting closer. And so I said to Lisa, I think this walk is over. And we turned around and we walked back to the house, and we now walk in the daylight. I didn't have a stick, I didn't have a knife, I didn't have a firearm, I didn't have anything. I was like, let's just go home, But here's the problem, we do walk in life, and there's times you see those little things bouncing around you. And even as young people, you're tempted to go and check that out. What is that? What is that? Am I missing out on something? Is there something there that and in doing so, you're moving away from the source of light, which is Jesus. And you end up chasing shadows in the darkness and getting in lots of trouble. And John, I believe, is encouraging his readers and the listeners here today to keep Jesus central in your focus and not get distracted by other lights that are red, because they tend to get you in trouble. But the closer you stay to Jesus, the better your life will be. You'll never walk in darkness, but you will have the light of life, the light which is life. And so he's inviting us to follow Jesus, to embrace Jesus. It's also kind of illustrated in that classic movie, that epic story of a father and son, becoming disenfranchised with one another. And then the father going through great extents to reach out and to find his son and bring him home. And then, of course, and in this battle, there's a journey of discovery for the son and the father. And then they eventually are reunited and they're back at home together. That great story, Finding Nemo. You remember that story? Finding Nemo, and at one point, they find themselves away from the path and in this very dark place. And if you've watched that movie, and you should if you haven't, it's classic. There's this little light. Ding, 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 ding. Oh, look at that light. And then this dark, dark, deep ocean, there's a little light, and they get close to the light. Oh, look at that, and all of a sudden, ding, it's this like weird, vicious looking fish with deep teeth, and he's like, chung, 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 and they're like, and this is the problem, right? If you get the wrong light, it's dangerous. Even deadly. And John makes it very clear. Life and light are the same thing. And that same thing is Jesus. All your friends that don't have Jesus are in the darkness. All your relatives that don't have Jesus are in the darkness. All your coworkers that don't have Jesus are in the darkness. And they need the light that is Jesus Christ. You need the light that is Jesus Christ. As we approach Easter and ultimately celebrate the death of Christ on the cross and the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the tomb, it all is pointing to this great truth of who Jesus is and what he has done for us. But as John writes his gospel, he presents these little stories not in just sort of random isolation, but to prove and to point us to the true reality and the living reality of knowing God personally through Jesus Christ. He is the light that we can follow today. And to a city that like we live in, where many people are chasing after burnt out light bulbs, God placed us here as New Life Community Church to point people to the source of light and life, which is Jesus Christ. That's what it's about for us. And that journey away from whatever you're holding on to towards Jesus, it's an interesting journey, but that's what we're here to do, to help people to say, you know what, this light will never satisfy, but there's life in Jesus. If you don't have the light of Jesus Christ this morning, I encourage you to receive him as your Savior, to come to him, to believe in him, to follow him. If you've been following other lights, today's the day maybe we need to just stop that. Get back on the path with Jesus Christ. And if you're following the light, the point is that you need to encourage others to follow the light. Our whole Easter season is about pointing people to Jesus. We're going to have a little celebration kind of before the service on Easter, and that's about bringing friends so that they can hear the story of the resurrection during their church service and celebrate the fact that we have new life in Jesus Christ because he died and rose again. And that's light, that's life. He's the bread of life. He's the resurrection of life. He's the door, the good shepherd. We're going to learn about so much what Jesus is, but the reality is today we discover that he is the light of the world. And then when we follow him, we point others to the true light. And I just pray that you would have the ability to do that in your life this week, where God has placed you. It's not by random chance that you are where you are. You're there for a reason. The reason is because he wants you to share this light, to shine this light, to point people to the true source of light and life, which is Jesus Christ. Would you pray with me as we close? The team's going to come up and lead us in that great song we started with, just celebrating this truth. With our heads bowed and